Bobby Witt Jr. is going to participate in the Home Run Derby, and we're going to talk about how cool that is for the organization and for Bobby himself. Next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That could be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and some producing from the day-to-day in my sports world, I guess you could call it. And then also when you come to this podcast and when you click on this link, you know that you're going to get 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. But you know the drill. You know the words by now. Don't even know how I forget some of my intro words when I am speaking to the audience that listens nearly every single day, because that's what we do for you. We bring you episodes Monday through Friday, and again, 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball, even on off days. And they're going to have two of them this week. It'll be tonight before they head to St. Louis to take on the Cardinals, and then on Thursday before they head to Boston to take on the Red Sox at Fenway Park to close out the first half of the season. Now, today's show is brought to you by Tax Network USA. Did you know that it's never too late to resolve your tax issues with the IRS? Don't wait. Reduce your tax debt and get help from a team of licensed tax professionals. Call them at 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/locked-on. So we did get some breaking news earlier today, and David Lesky on Twitter, I want to give credit where credit is due. David Lesky of Inside the Crown, he had put out there on Twitter earlier this weekend, or this past weekend, I should say, that Bobby Witt Jr. was likely to participate in the Home Run Derby. And then lo and behold, we get from Bobby's official Twitter account today that he is going to be participating in the Home Run Derby in Arlington, sort of a homecoming for him. And it adds another element to what is going to be a fantastic week down in the state of Texas. I'll be down there. I'll be there Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday morning. So I'll be flying back to Kansas City, back in our usual habitat here, our usual podcasting room for a Wednesday episode. But on Monday and Tuesday, I will be doing them remotely in Texas, where I will be staying. We'll have plenty of content. I'm going to try to find a way to put out the interviews that we will be doing. If we can get some one-on-ones, that'd be really cool to kind of sync up to put out there for, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, the Amazon Music, all of those ones that we preach to you at the beginning of every single episode. So would try to do that. Probably not going to be able to do YouTube because I'm not going to be bringing any cameras or anything like that into the stadium when we have media availability. But Bobby Witt Jr. is going to be one of those guys that we absolutely will be talking to before the All-Star game and now before the Home Run Derby. And the cool part about this, on top of the All-Star game, is that, the Royals are enjoying one of their better seasons in the last decade. Yes, they have struggled of late, but the great news of yesterday, on top of winning 10-1 against Colorado, was that they got 4 guys into the All-Star game. And I think the letdown a little bit was that Bobby Witt Jr. was not going to be starting in the All-Star game over Gunnar Henderson, but in the final weeks leading up to the official announcement, I wasn't too hopeful that Bobby Witt Jr. was going to be starting because of the numbers that Gunnar Henderson was putting up while Bobby Witt Jr. was slumping a little bit. But then you get this, added part of it of being in the Home Run Derby, and Gunnar Henderson is going to be in that as well. So Bobby Witt Jr. is going to be doing the same thing that Gunnar Henderson is. And I think that's great not only for Royals fans and Orioles fans, it's great for the game of baseball to see those two guys compete and also play with each other for the American League All-Stars on Tuesday night. But for the Derby itself, it only just adds more exposure to this baseball team because the Royals are going to have 4 representatives on Tuesday night, and they're going to have a representative in the Home Run Derby. The last time they had a member in the Home Run Derby was Salvador Perez, and that was at Coors Field, and he was great. in the home run derby, but it just so happened Pete Alonso was better and interviewed, by the way, for the entirety of Salvador Perez's round, which was phenomenal. But Pete Alonso, as I said, was just a little bit better. That was the only true exposure, though, the Royals got, because when Salvador Perez would get in the game or he would be starting in the All-Star game, it was just this feeling of, well, that's good for the Royals. But it wasn't really putting them on the map of, wow, this is a team that's up and coming. They've got a lot of good players out there and a lot of star players out there. And that's what's going to be great both on Monday and on Tuesday night. The Royals are going to be in people's faces, whether you like them or not. You're going to have Bobby Witt Jr. in multiple ways contributing to All-Star Week. Seth Lugo could, and I'm putting, in all caps there, could start the All-Star game for the American League. I have my doubts. I think it's likely going to be Tarek Skubal. You never know, though, because Seth Lugo is still leading in numerous categories out there, and I think he can make a very strong case and a compelling case that he is deserving of starting the All-Star game. The Home Run Derby, though, has always been a great spectacle, and it is a part of All-Star Week that a lot of people just get excited to tune into. The All-Star game is great to see, but you may not always get a fantastic game. You may not get a very entertaining game, despite putting all of the game's best players out there on the field at once. The Derby gets the shock and awe factor. The Derby gets the jaw-dropping moments if you have somebody up there that can hit the ball, 470, 480 feet from home plate. You get those rounds in which guys hit 10 or 12 home runs in a row. Like, that is a really fun part about All-Star Week because it's comparable to the slam dunk contest in the NBA. A lot of people may not tune into the All-Star game, but they're damn sure going to turn into the dunk contest. And I think the same goes for baseball. You're going to have a Royals player, and not just any Royals player, your young superstar competing on a big stage. And he may not get out of the first round. He may not do very well in general. But the fact that he's out there is just more exposure, more popularity for this team. And it's not just for a few days here, right? The hope for the Royals is that you put them on so much of a scene and they can have a strong second half that it becomes, once again, an enticing spot for players to come to. If you see Bobby Witt Jr. in the home run derby, in the All-Star game, and Lugo and Reagan's pitching in the All-Star game, and Salvador Perez still showing up to All-Star games, well, it's going to be enticing to somebody going, well, they actually have some great players out there. And not only great players, they had guys come to Kansas City and put up an All-Star season. They'll have that with Seth Lugo. They'll have that with Cole Reagans. That could be a welcomed part of their free agent pitch going into this offseason. You could look at Lugo, you could look at Walker, looking at Reagans and go, man, I mean, next to the Mariners, that's the second best pitching rotation in the American League. And they were the second worst rotation in the American, or in all of baseball, just 1 year ago. So you put all of these parts together, the great aspect that Bobby Witt Jr. gets to participate in both of these events in his hometown, less than 20 miles from where he grew up, next to the stadium where his dad pitched in for a number of years. You had so many parts of that made that a cool story. And that will be a talking point going into All-Star Week. But for the popularity of this baseball team, that's another added element to this. That is another, very exciting part of being such a recognized team during an All-Star Week. Because your team is still in a wild card hunt, because you're sending 4 guys to the All-Star game, because you're sending somebody to participate in the home run derby. All of those things combined, and it's one of the better All-Star weeks the Royals have had in recent memory. I put this out on Twitter yesterday. This is only the 4th time, I believe, since 1980 that the Royals had sent 4 or more guys to the All-Star game. Now you add in that they're going to be in the derby. And I don't think in 2015, despite having 7 guys total, they had anybody in the home run derby. I remember Todd Frazier won it in Cincinnati. I don't think they had somebody in the derby. I remember Mike Moustakas got into the derby in Miami in 2017, and then Salvi got it in 2021, I believe it would have been, or 22 for the Colorado All-Star game. This is different now. You've got a lot of different phases in which your players are going to be involved and your team is still in it. They are still competing for a wild card spot. And as long as they don't limp completely or bottom out in this final week before the All-Star break, there's going to be a lot of excitement rolling into the second half with the Derby, the All-Star game, and the Royals hopefully doing their job against St. Louis and against the Boston Red Sox. We're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, should the Royals still go after some players at the deadline? We'll tell you what we think next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Have a couple of sponsors I want to give a shout out to, starting with Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, and unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stat projections and watch all the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. And you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks, and you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Also want to give a shout out to the title sponsor today in Tax Network USA. Here on Locked On Royals, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news for your team, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs. It is year-round. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at taxnetworkusa.com go to bat for you. With over 14 years of experience and an A-plus rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. And you can also receive a $250 discount off their services if you mention that you got it from the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been asked this question a few times in the last few weeks, the last couple of series, with the Royals not playing so well and them slipping out of a wild card spot. As of today, still just a game and a half behind Boston, who they'll see this weekend. It does become a more complicated matter, and I can give a variety of answers as to why it's not as simple as it once was. Let's start at the top with that the market is not overwhelmingly good. I think both in the offensive market and the bullpen market, the starting pitching market, there's not an overwhelming number of guys that make sense or feel like the best fit. I also think the problem, going to the second bullet point here, the Royals do not have a lot to give up, nor are they willing to give up somebody that would really transform their bullpen or their lineup. That has been undeniable now for the last couple of weeks. The Royals can't get Mason Miller. I don't think the Royals can get Tanner Scott. I would have said Carlos Estevez is a fit, but it was reported today that the Angels are getting bombarded with teams about wanting Carlos Estevez. So it now comes into a bidding war, and the Royals can't outbid a lot of teams with what they have in their farm system. I think you look at your trade in the offseason now a little bit differently. What John Schreiber has provided for you now, and who you gave up in David Sandlin. You know, if John Schreiber finishes the year like this, it's going to look like a failed trade on the Royals' part, though they did need a bullpen arm at that point in time. And he was great for the first half of the season, and maybe you look back fondly on that John Schreiber was a big reason how the Royals got off to a really good start this year. But still, you look at that trade and go, do you want to do that again? Do you go get somebody who's not electrifying? He doesn't have huge swing and miss, but he does make our bullpen a little bit better, though you're giving up your 10th best prospect, your 11th best prospect. So that's the second bullet point there. I don't think they've got a lot to offer. I don't think they're willing to give up the top guys that teams are wanting. And then number 3, you have to be careful at times with when you do buy and when you do sell. I don't see the Royals selling, honestly. I don't see them trading away Lugo. I think if they don't make the playoffs this year, they're going to try to run it back with even more money invested into this team, likely offensively when they go in the offseason. Because the best part about this season has been solidifying the rotation. You feel good about the 5 that you have right now, and you pretty much can run back the same group next year. Now, I know there's some player options involved, and Brady Singer's coming up on a contract year, but you feel good about a lot of the top end guys in your rotation. You'd invest more offensively. That's what I think would happen if the Royals fell short. But I do think I've changed my opinion a little bit on who they may target. I think I have put myself out of the belief of them going after a true back end guy. I don't see that happening anymore. I think if the Royals make a move, it'll be very minor. I think they will be going after guys that are pitching in the big leagues right now, but we're not talking about as heavily. I could see them making a minor trade or two, and let's maybe 2 guys here to add to this bullpen to give them some extra depth. And I still think that could go a long way here. But the idea of them trading for Tanner Scott or for Estevez, I'm losing more and more hope because of the interest other teams have out there. Michael Kopech, I thought for a while would make a lot of sense, but we discussed this yesterday. I'm not sure that he does a lot for your bullpen. He could come in maybe to change the scenery, and he looks a lot better than he did for the White Sox. Maybe you take him out of the closer's role and he's good in the 8th inning spot. You can consider that a minor move. His numbers aren't that great. I don't think he's going to cost a lot. So you could turn to that outlet. I still think Austin Adams and Ursig kind of fall into that minor acquisition part of it. It comes down to rolling the dice, though, of do you really think they're going to make you better? And that is, unfortunately, what J.J. Picollo and this front office are going to have to decide. Because you do have to be smart about buying and buying with intent. I think they are going to make some moves that are equivalent to what the 13 and 14 teams did. Just very minor acquisitions, some that came after the deadline, and they were waiver wire pickups, just to get them over the hump and give them a really good chance to make a push. I can see that happening. Do not see them going after 2 to 3 great bullpen arms and mortgaging away, 4 or 5 of your top 10 prospects. I don't see that. I don't believe there's a ton of guys in their system that you can deem untouchable, but there would be some guys I would be nervous in letting go to other organizations, and then 2 or 3 years down the road, them becoming a big-time player. Like right now, my mind is starting to spin on the John Schreiber deal. David Sandlin has all of a sudden found a little bit of footing in the Red Sox system. He still hasn't thrown a lot of innings this year, but he's hitting 97, 98, 99. And if Schreiber finishes the year, as I said, like this, it now comes down to what David Sandlin does. And if David Sandlin becomes a damn good starter for Boston, well, then you're going to have your answer. So the Royals might be hesitant on that front to do that again. I think another great part about this is that Chris Bubich pitched yesterday, and maybe he's an acquisition you consider to be a trade deadline pickup. Maybe Walter Pennington is considered to be a acquisition in addition to this bullpen. And there's 2 guys right there. You can move out 2 guys that maybe don't belong in this bullpen anymore. We talked about that in teasing today's episode, and we'll probably get into it a little bit more tomorrow just because I wanted to get into the Derby talk and the buying and also previewing this Cardinals series. But there are guys that do not belong in this Royals bullpen anymore. And I think there are more deserving guys, and maybe it's just finding guys from the minor leagues, Pennington, Bubich. It can work like that. And then maybe you do go grab a right-hander, a Kopech, a Ursig, an Austin Adams, and stick them in the back end of your bullpen. Maybe that feels more likely at this point. I can tell you confidently, I don't see them selling. I'm not as confident in this part of it, but I am leaning toward that confident part. I don't think they're going to make a big fish trade. I don't think they're going after one of the better bullpen arms. I think they're going to try to find a guy in their wheelhouse that they can afford. Still not a bad thing, but a lot can also rely on this week. If the Royals play poorly this week and they find themselves 5.5 or 6 games back of a wild card spot going into the All-Star break, maybe your mentality changes and you just don't make any moves. You stick to what you have. You start giving other guys more responsibility, cut bait with some of the guys that simply aren't working anymore. A lot of different ways you can go with it. But if they have a good week, maybe you do start to ramp it back up again and you try to go after one of those top bullpen arms, or maybe a corner outfield bat that you really feel like can help out your lineup at the top of the order. We're going to take our final break of the show, but before we do that, want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. When we return, let's preview this big series against the surging St. Louis Cardinals. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Want to tell you about our final sponsor today in FanDuel. And as you know by now, I do love sports, and I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have wrapped up, we get fewer and fewer games. And the sports just aren't sportsing like we all want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And tomorrow, Michael Wacha is being going up against his former team in the St. Louis Cardinals. He's been great over his last 7 to 8 outings. So maybe let's throw down some money on Michael Wacha getting over 6 innings in this game against the Cardinals. That'll be my bet going into game 1 of that series against the Cards. Now let's talk about that series against the St. Louis Cardinals. Last year, the Royals split at Busch Stadium. They had that near combined no-hitter with Mike Myers being the opener, the long relief guy, because I think Josh Stallmont had opened that game, and then Mike Myers went on a tear and I think took it into the 8th inning, if I'm not mistaken. But the Royals had won that game. They weren't playing for much at that point in the season, but still, they had some success in St. Louis last year. Now, another part of this is it's a different Cardinals team. It's a Cardinals team that's playing a lot differently than they were at the beginning of the year. At the beginning of the year, the Cardinals had really put themselves in a hole. And the National League Central was moving faster than they could really keep up with. And when you put yourself in a hole in the division that doesn't really wait on you, they leave you in the dust, they leave you buried in that hole. It takes a long time to find yourself again. It takes a long time to find your footing. And you feel the pressure every series of, oh no, we're 5 games under. You got to take 3 of 4 in this series instead of just, hey, get a split. You put more heat on the team. And that's something I don't believe St. Louis was thriving at the beginning of the year. But now they have really found their rhythm, and they are looking like the Cardinals of old. At the beginning of the year, Paul Goldschmidt couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat. He was not providing them anything at the top of the lineup. Nolan Arenado, kind of the same thing there. They dealt with some injuries, and I don't think that's gotten completely better. I think they have hit their stride. Let's just call it that. I think it's a point in the season that the Cardinals got really hot, found themselves back in playoff contention, and historically, the Cardinals have been great at rattling off great months, rattling off a couple of series in a row, going on a long win streak. They are known to do that. And, in the same state, the Royals couldn't really do that. And this will be, interesting to me in such a big series leading into that Boston one. Because the Red Sox get Oakland before Kansas City comes to Fenway Park. If the Royals don't play well against St. Louis, you could very well be looking at your season against the Red Sox at Fenway Park. And I don't think you want that type of pressure. I like the pitching matchup in game 1, and I've done this before, and I've, really regretted it because I like the matchup when Cole Reagans faced Kyle Freeland. I like the matchup when Lugo faced Austin Gomber. They lost both of those games, and they leave with one win in the series, and it was Brady Singer. I like the matchup. Michael Wacha pitching in a ballpark he's very familiar with against Palante. And I think Palante is a guy the Royals could match up well with, somebody that throws hard, and he's a right-hander. He's not a soft-throwing lefty. I think that could be a good matchup for this Royals offense. On Wednesday, not so much. Alec Marsh, who's been really poor, really since that Yankees outing that he had. I thought he was all right against Cleveland, but the offense had given him so much run support. Maybe the Royals lineup can do the same thing for him against Sonny Gray. Just give Alec Marsh a 5-run cushion early on and let him coast. But I do think at bare minimum, you have to split. And I think everybody knows that. You don't go into a 2-game series and say, oh, well, bare minimum, you don't win a game. Right? Bare minimum does have to be a split. But if you can find a way to take the only 2 in this series in St. Louis, man, I feel like that you're going to have so much momentum rolling into that series against the Red Sox and takes a lot of pressure off that series. Because even, I hate to say this, but even with a sweep, the Royals getting swept by Boston, if they took 2 in St. Louis, they'd be 4.5 back, assuming that, since the Red Sox are playing Oakland for 3, unless Oakland got swept, the Royals would gain a game on the Red Sox. They could roll into Fenway Park, maybe just a game back. And if you got swept, yeah, nobody's feeling good about that right before the break, but you're only 4 games back. You don't play well against St. Louis. You get buried in St. Louis. And let's say that Boston does sweep Oakland. Well, that puts you now 4 games back going into that Boston series. So now even by sweeping the Red Sox, you don't have a playoff spot. But if you find a way to just take 1 or 2 of 3, you still have your head above water. But I do think it starts this week in a big way against the Cardinals. This is going to be a sold-out crowd you're playing in front of. The Cardinals do have the upper hands in a few of the in-between-the-lines stats. I think they have the much better bullpen. There could be a game or 2 that is decided by the bullpen, and I don't like to put my money on the Royals at all in a spot like that. But I'm also worried about this Royals offense. I am concerned with the way they've been so up and down of late, and I think even more up and down they've been all season long. This has been too hit and miss for me. And this is a week you have to show up and play some of your best ball of the year. We talked about the gauntlet for so many weeks of how it was going to challenge them for a second half. Well, though this isn't the second half, this is a big challenge for this ball club. This is a 5-game set that you have here, a 5-game week where you have off days involved here. You can't be flat anytime you show up. I'm not expecting the Royals to go 5-0, but just a winning week. 3-2 can do that for you. 3-2 could maybe get you back into a playoff spot. And then you get that week off and you open up the second half against the White Sox at home. Then you can start to go on your tear again. At least you would hope so, because back at home is where the Royals play so well. That's why this is such a big test, because they aren't playing at Kauffman Stadium. They're playing in places they typically don't play well in. And they're playing 2 teams that are playing really good ball. I am interested in what version of the Royals we're going to get. It feels like it's been quite some time since we've gotten the good version of them. And I know I'm talking about a team that just beat the Guardians out of three out of 4 times at Kauffman Stadium, but that's at home. I don't remember the last time the Royals played really well on the road. It seems like it's been an eternity, but you can't really make any excuses. It has to be put up or shut up time for this team, or they could bury themselves in the wild card race before we hit the All-Star break. They have to show up against St. Louis. They have to show up against Boston. There is no and, ifs, or buts about it. Can't play the way like you did against Colorado. Can't play like you did against Miami. Can't play like you did against Oakland. The only thing I can hope for is they're going to play up to competition and not down to competition like they did over the weekend. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. One last shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tomorrow, we will dive into some of that news of, well, maybe the Royals need to cut bait with some of the guys they have in the bullpen. Maybe how they can construct that bullpen a little bit better with guys that aren't in it right now. and we could be evaluating the trade market a little bit more come this time tomorrow. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.